The email notification chimed at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, just as I was reviewing quarterly projections for EcoWrap Solutions. The sender's name made my stomach drop. Dad. The subject line read, "Urgent. Please call immediately." I stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it, my cursor hovering over the message like it might bite me. Inside were just 4 words that would have made me laugh if they weren't so pathetic. "We need your help." 3 years. 3 years since they'd looked me dead in the eye and told me my business idea was too risky and not a sound investment. 3 years since they'd handed my brother Ryan a check for $200,000 to fund his ridiculous social media app that crashed and burned within 18 months. 3 years since I'd learned that being the responsible daughter meant absolutely nothing when it came to earning their respect or support. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, let me tell you how it all began, because some betrayals don't happen overnight. They build slowly like cracks in a foundation, until one day the whole structure comes tumbling down. My name is Alexandra Chen, though everyone calls me Alex, and I've always been what people politely call driven. While my friends were planning spring break trips during college, I was researching market trends and sketching business models on coffee shop napkins. While Ryan was switching majors for the 3rd time and spending Dad's money on fraternity parties, I was graduating summa cum laude with a double major in environmental science and business administration. I had a plan, a vision, and enough determination to power a small city. The idea for EcoWrap Solutions came to me during my senior year internship at a packaging company in downtown Phoenix. I watched trucks roll in daily, loaded with mountains of non-biodegradable plastic wrap and foam padding that would outlive us all by centuries. The irony wasn't lost on me that in a desert city where water conservation was a way of life, we were drowning in packaging waste that would never decompose. There had to be a better way. I spent months researching biodegradable alternatives, connecting with suppliers who were developing innovative materials from agricultural waste. Corn, husks, wheat stems, even mushroom roots could be transformed into protective packaging that would dissolve harmlessly in landfills. The market was ripe for disruption, with consumers increasingly demanding environmentally responsible options and businesses looking to improve their sustainability profiles. The numbers were solid. I'd run projections, conducted market research, even secured preliminary interest from 3 local distribution companies. All I needed was $75,000 to cover initial inventory, equipment leasing, and operating expenses for the first year. It was a modest ask for a business with such clear potential, especially compared to the wild spending I'd witnessed in Silicon Valley startups that burned through millions without ever turning a profit. That's when I made what I now realize was my first mistake. I believed family meant something. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in March, around the dining table where we'd shared countless family dinners. Mom had made her famous enchiladas, and the house smelled like cumin and hope. I arrived with a professionally bound business plan, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and a detailed timeline for profitability. I'd rehearsed my presentation for weeks, anticipating every possible question or concern. Dad sat at the head of the table in his usual spot, reading glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through my proposal. Mom bustled around the kitchen, occasionally peering over his shoulder to examine the charts and graphs I'd spent hours perfecting. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors they'd refinished themselves the previous summer. "This is impressive work, honey," Mom said finally, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. "You've really thought this through." Dad nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "The research is thorough," he agreed. "But Alex, starting a business is incredibly risky. The statistics on failure rates are sobering." I'd expected this response. "That's exactly why I've been so careful with the planning," I replied, leaning forward with enthusiasm. I'm not asking you to fund some wild dream. This is a calculated investment in a growing market with clear demand. $75,000 is a lot of money, Dad continued, removing his glasses to clean them methodically. That's a significant portion of our retirement savings. I understand that, I said quickly, but this isn't a gift or a loan. I'm offering you equity in the company. When EcoWrap succeeds, you'll see returns on your investment. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Mom glanced at Dad, some unspoken communication passing between them that excluded me entirely. Finally, Dad set down his glasses and met my eyes. Sweetheart, we love your ambition, but we can't risk our financial security on an unproven venture. The packaging industry is dominated by established players with deep pockets. A small startup would have an incredibly difficult time competing. The words hit me like a physical blow. But the market research shows. Market research can be misleading, Dad interrupted gently. On paper, lots of ideas look promising. The reality of building a business is much harder than projections suggest. I felt my careful composure beginning to crack. So you won't even consider it? Mom reached across the table to pat my hand. Maybe in a few years, once you've gained more experience in the corporate world. There's no shame in working for someone else first, learning the ropes. I've been learning the ropes my entire life, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've worked every summer since I was 16. I graduated at the top of my class. I've done everything right. And we're proud of you, Dad said. But being smart and hardworking doesn't guarantee business success. The risk is just too high. I gathered my presentation materials with shaking hands, the carefully bound pages suddenly feeling like mockery. I thought you believed in me, I whispered. We do believe in you, Mom insisted. That's why we want you to take a safer path. Safer. The word tasted bitter in my mouth as I drove home to my studio apartment that night. Safer meant working for someone else's dreams while mine withered on the vine. Safer meant accepting that my parents saw me as too fragile, too inexperienced, too risky to deserve their support. But the real betrayal was still coming. 6 months later, Ryan graduated college with a degree in communications and what he generously called a business idea. ConnectFlow, he explained over Sunday dinner, would revolutionize professional networking by combining the visual appeal of Instagram with the career focus of LinkedIn. Users could create video profiles, showcase their skills through short clips, and connect with potential employers or collaborators through an algorithm that matched personalities and career goals. It's like TikTok meets networking, he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Nobody's doing anything like it. I watched from across the table as he sketched his concept on a napkin, the same casual presentation style that had gotten him through 4 years of college by the skin of his teeth. No market research, no financial projections, no detailed business plan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Just excitement and confidence that somehow seemed more compelling than my months of careful preparation. That's fascinating, Dad said, leaning forward with interest. The social media space is exploding right now. Exactly, Ryan continued. I've already talked to some developers about building the platform. With the right funding, we could have a beta version ready in 6 months. The conversation that followed was surreal. The same parents who had lectured me about market saturation and established competitors were now nodding along as Ryan described entering a space dominated by billion-dollar companies like LinkedIn and Facebook. The same people who had called my environmentally focused business plan too niche were excited about an app targeting young professionals. How much would you need to get started? Mom asked, as if the question was merely academic. Probably around $200,000. To cover development, Marketing and operating expenses for the first year, Ryan said casually, as if he were discussing lunch plans. $200,000. Nearly 3 times what I had requested for a business with actual market validation and a clear path to profitability. That's a substantial investment, Dad mused, but his tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. I know it sounds like a lot, Ryan said, but think about the potential returns. If ConnectFlow takes off, we could be looking at millions in valuation within a few years. I wanted to scream. Where were the lectures about failure rates and market dominance? Where were the concerns about financial security and retirement savings? Instead, I watched my parents exchange the same look they'd shared during my presentation. But this time it carried entirely different meaning. Let us think about it, Dad said finally. 2 weeks later, Ryan announced that Mom and Dad had agreed to fund ConnectFlow. The check was already written, the LLC paperwork filed, the developers hired. In 14 days, they had committed to an investment that dwarfed my request for a business with no research, no proven demand, and no clear competitive advantage. The conversation where I learned about their decision was brief and devastating. Mom called while I was working late at my temp job, processing insurance claims in a windowless office building in downtown Phoenix. I wanted you to hear it from us first, she said, her voice carefully neutral. We've decided to invest in Ryan's startup. The words hit me like a physical blow. You said investing in family businesses was too risky. This is different, Mom replied. The tech industry has tremendous growth potential right now. And my industry doesn't? A pause. Packaging isn't exactly cutting edge, honey. It's a multi-billion-dollar market with clear consumer demand for sustainable alternatives, I said, repeating arguments that had fallen on deaf ears 6 months earlier. Ryan's entering one of the most competitive spaces in tech with no experience and no differentiation. We believe in his vision, Mom said simply. There it was. The truth that had been lurking beneath all their rational explanations and practical concerns. They believed in Ryan's vision, but not in mine. They were willing to risk their retirement savings on his untested idea, but not on my carefully researched business plan. The golden child could do no wrong, while the responsible daughter was too risky to support. That night, I sat in my car, outside their house for an hour, watching the warm light spill from the windows of the home where I'd grown up. I thought about all the family dinners where Ryan's latest adventure was celebrated, while my achievements were noted and filed away. I remembered high school graduation, where his C average was excused because he's finding himself, while my valedictorian speech was interrupted by Dad taking a work call. I saw clearly, perhaps for the first time, that this wasn't about business, risk, or market analysis. This was about who they saw as worthy of their faith. The tears came then, hot and bitter in the desert night. Not just for the money I wouldn't receive, but for the revelation that my parents' love came with conditions I could apparently never meet. But even in that moment of devastation, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I wasn't going to let their rejection define my limits. If they wouldn't invest in my dream, I'd find another way. I'd prove them wrong, not through arguments or presentations, but through success. The next morning, I called Emma Rodriguez, my former study partner from business school, who had moved to Phoenix to work for a sustainable technology firm. Over coffee at Desert Grounds, I explained my situation with as much dignity as I could muster. They actually chose to fund ConnectFlow over EcoWrap? Emma asked, incredulous. Have they seen the market projections for sustainable packaging? Apparently, it's not cutting edge enough, I said bitterly. Emma was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte with deliberate precision. What if I told you I might know someone who'd be interested in your business plan? That someone turned out to be Tom Mitchell, a former venture capitalist who had retired early and now invested in environmentally focused startups. Emma arranged a meeting for the following. week, and I spent every spare moment refining my presentation, knowing this might be my only shot. Tom's office was nothing like the corporate conference rooms I'd imagined. Located in a converted warehouse in Scottsdale, it was filled with samples from the companies he'd funded: solar panels, water purification systems, biodegradable phone, cases, and countless other innovations designed to solve real problems. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with graying temples and the kind of focused attention that made you feel like the most important person in the room. "Emma sent me your business plan," he said after offering me coffee. "I've got to say, it's one of the most thorough analyses I've seen from someone without formal business experience." "Thank you," I replied, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "The sustainable packaging market is exploding," Tom continued. "Major corporations are scrambling to meet consumer demand for environmentally responsible options. The question is whether a small startup can compete with established players who are pivoting to meet that demand." It was the same concern my parents had raised, but Tom's tone suggested he saw it as a challenge to solve rather than a reason to give up. "That's exactly why timing matters," I said, launching into the presentation I'd refined over months of rejection. "The big companies are slow to innovate because they have existing infrastructure and relationships to protect. A small, agile startup can move faster and offer more personalized solutions." Tom listened intently as I walked through market research, competitive analysis, and financial projections. He asked tough questions about scalability, supply chain management, and customer acquisition costs. Unlike my parents, who had seemed to be looking for reasons to say no, Tom appeared genuinely interested in understanding how the business could succeed. "What about funding?" he asked finally. "How much are you looking for? And what are you offering in return?" "$75,000 for 25% equity," I said, the same terms I'd offered my parents. "That gives us 18 months of runway to prove the concept and reach profitability." Tom nodded slowly. "That's reasonable for a seed-stage investment." He paused, studying the financial projections one more time. "Alex, I'll be direct with you. This isn't the sexiest industry, and you're not promising the kind of exponential returns that get VCs excited. But it's a solid business addressing a real need with clear growth potential." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I'm willing to invest the $75,000, Tom said finally, "but I want 30% equity and a seat on your board of advisors. I've got experience and connections that could be valuable as you scale." I could have cried with relief. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Absolutely, yes." 3 months later, EcoWrap Solutions officially launched from a small office space in Scottsdale. Emma had left her corporate job to join me as head of operations, bringing both expertise and credibility to our fledgling company. Tom's connections had opened doors with potential customers and suppliers that would have taken years to develop on my own. Our first major client was a local organic food distributor looking to align their packaging with their environmental values. The order was modest, but it proved our concept and provided the cash flow to reinvest in inventory and equipment. Within 6 months, we'd signed contracts with 3 more companies and were fielding inquiries from businesses across the Southwest. Meanwhile, ConnectFlow was struggling. The app launched 4 months behind schedule, plagued by technical glitches and user interface problems that made it nearly unusable. Ryan's developer team, hired based on the lowest bid rather than proven experience, had created a platform that crashed frequently and offered few features that weren't already available through existing networking sites. I learned about ConnectFlow's problems through social media rather than family updates. Ryan had stopped mentioning the business during Sunday dinners, and my parents had grown noticeably quiet about their investment. When I occasionally asked how things were going, the responses were vague and increasingly uncomfortable. The truth emerged during a family barbecue celebrating Mom's birthday in late summer. Ryan had been drinking, and his usual confident demeanor had given way to something approaching panic. "The user adoption numbers are terrible," he confided. To our cousin Mike, apparently forgetting I was within earshot. We've got maybe 300 active users, and half of them signed up just to be polite. The investors Dad connected me with took one look at our metrics and ran. What about pivoting? Mike asked. Maybe focusing on a different market? With what money? Ryan's laugh was bitter. We burned through most of the funding on development. There's maybe $40,000 left, and that won't last more than a few months. I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this. Part of me was vindicated. The business my parents had deemed too risky was thriving while their safe tech investment was failing. But another part of me felt genuinely sorry for Ryan, who had never faced real failure before and seemed completely unprepared for the emotional toll. That sympathy disappeared entirely during the conversation that followed. Maybe I should ask Alex for advice, Ryan mused, glancing in my direction. Her little packaging thing seems to be doing okay. Little packaging thing. 7 months of 18-hour days, of learning supply chain management and customer service and inventory control, of building something meaningful from nothing, reduced to a little packaging thing. I don't know if that's comparable, Mike replied diplomatically. Different industries, different challenges. Still, Ryan continued, family should help family, right? Maybe she'd be willing to invest some of her profits in ConnectFlow, help us pivot or whatever. The audacity was breathtaking. The same brother whose success had been funded by our parents while my dreams were dismissed as too risky was now considering asking me to bail out his failing venture. The responsible daughter who had been deemed unworthy of family investment was suddenly good enough to rescue the golden child from the consequences of his poor decisions. I said nothing that day, but I filed the conversation away in the growing folder of evidence that my family's love was entirely conditional on what I could provide them. EcoWrap's first year exceeded every projection I'd made in my original business plan. We expanded our product line to include biodegradable bubble wrap alternatives and water-soluble packaging tape. Our client base grew to include restaurants, e-commerce companies, and even a major retailer looking to improve their environmental footprint. Emma and I were working harder than ever, but every challenge felt like progress rather than punishment. The success wasn't lost on my parents, though their response was complicated. They expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it was tinged with something that felt like surprise, as if they hadn't actually expected me to succeed without their support. During family gatherings, they would mention EcoWrap to friends and relatives with obvious satisfaction, taking credit for raising such an entrepreneurial daughter while carefully avoiding any mention of their refusal to invest. We always knew Alex had it in her, Dad told my aunt during Christmas dinner, as if he hadn't spent an hour explaining why my business plan was doomed to failure. She gets her work ethic from us, Mom added, apparently forgetting that she'd encouraged me to seek safer employment rather than risk entrepreneurship. The cognitive dissonance was staggering, but I'd learned to expect nothing less from people who could simultaneously fund my brother's failing startup while declaring my proven business too risky to support. By spring of our second year, EcoWrap had outgrown our original office space and hired 3 additional employees. Tom had connected us with a packaging consultant who helped us streamline our manufacturing processes, and Emma's expertise in sustainable technology had led to innovations that set us apart from competitors who were finally entering the market. The timing couldn't have been better. As larger companies began developing their own eco-friendly packaging solutions, we'd already established relationships with suppliers and refined our products through real-world testing. Instead of being crushed by corporate competition, we were positioned as the experienced player that could handle specialized orders and provide personalized service. ConnectFlow officially shut down that same spring, 18 months after launch, and 6 months after burning through the last of my parents' investment. The announcement came not through family discussion, but through a brief Facebook post from Ryan, thanking users and investors for their support and citing changing market conditions as the reason for closure. Changing market conditions. as if the fundamental problems with the business model hadn't been apparent from the beginning to anyone who bothered to research the competitive landscape. The financial impact on my parents was more severe than I'd initially realized. Ryan's business hadn't just failed. It had consumed nearly a third of their retirement savings at a time when they could least afford the loss. Dad was 68, Mom was 65, and neither had planned to work past 70. The connect flow. Investment had been predicated on returns that would have supplemented their retirement income and provided financial security for their golden years. Instead, they were facing the prospect of working longer than planned or dramatically reducing their lifestyle expectations. The house in Paradise Valley, bought with the assumption of comfortable retirement, now felt like a financial burden rather than a reward for decades of hard work. I learned these details not from my parents, who maintained their silence about family financial matters, but from Emma's mother, who played bridge with Mom every Tuesday and apparently heard more honest assessments of their situation than their own daughter ever received. "Your mother is beside herself," Mrs. Rodriguez reported during one of our coffee meetings. "She's talking about going back to substitute teaching just to make ends meet. And your father is considering postponing retirement indefinitely." The information left me with deeply conflicted feelings. Part of me felt genuine sympathy for parents facing financial stress in what should have been their relaxation years. But another part of me remembered sitting across from them 2 years earlier, listening to lectures about financial security and retirement savings as justification for refusing to support my business. They had been willing to risk that same financial security on Ryan's unproven idea, and now they were facing the consequences of that choice. The daughter they had deemed too risky to support was thriving, while the son they had believed in was unemployed and living in their basement, apparently paralyzed by his first taste of real failure. The justice felt both satisfying and hollow, like winning an argument that never should have been necessary in the first place. That's when Emma made an observation that would prove prophetic. "They're going to come to you eventually," she said, over lunch at our favorite sandwich shop near the office. "When people are desperate enough, pride becomes a luxury they can't afford." I shook my head. They'd never ask me for help. That would require admitting they were wrong about everything. "Maybe not directly," Emma replied. "But desperate people find ways to justify asking for what they need. They'll convince themselves it's different somehow, that the circumstances have changed." "Even if they did," I said, "what would I owe them? They made their choice when they had the chance to support me." Emma was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta around her fork with deliberate precision. "That's not really the question, is it? The question is, what kind of person you want to be when they do come asking." Her words stayed with me through the busy months that followed as EcoWrap continued its rapid growth. We were preparing to launch a new line of compostable food containers, and the pre-orders were already exceeding our production capacity. Success was everything I'd imagined and more, but Emma's prediction lingered in the back of my mind like an approaching storm cloud. The call came on a Thursday night in November, almost 3 years to the day since my parents had first refused to invest in my business. I was working late again, reviewing contracts for a major expansion that would triple our manufacturing capacity, when Dad's name appeared on my phone screen. It was the first time he'd called me directly in months. Our communication had been limited to polite exchanges during family gatherings and brief responses to group text messages about holiday plans. The sound of his ringtone sent an unexpected jolt of anxiety through my chest. "Hi, Dad," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Alex, honey," he said, and I could hear the strain immediately. "I hope I'm not calling too late." "It's fine. I was just finishing up some work. Is everything okay?" A pause that stretched long enough to make me wonder if the call had dropped. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Your mother and I are dealing with some financial challenges, and we were hoping you might have some advice." Advice. The word was carefully chosen, implying consultation rather than desperation, guidance rather than assistance. but I could hear the desperation underneath the diplomatic language, the pride struggling against necessity. "What kind of challenges?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Well, the ConnectFlow investment didn't work out the way we'd hoped," Dad admitted, as if the complete failure of Ryan's startup had been a minor disappointment rather than a devastating loss. "And some of our other investments have underperformed. We're looking at options for adjusting our retirement timeline." Other investments. I wondered what those might be and whether they were equally poorly researched and emotionally driven. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "Have you spoken with a financial advisor?" "We have, actually. But the options are limited at our age. Working longer or reducing expenses are really the only viable solutions." Another pause. "Unless there were other possibilities we hadn't considered." There it was. The opening Emma had predicted, wrapped in enough ambiguity to preserve their dignity while making their needs clear. They weren't asking for help directly, but they were creating space for me to offer it. The old Alex, the one who had spent her childhood seeking their approval and her adolescence trying to prove herself worthy of their respect, might have rushed to fill that space. She might have offered to invest in their retirement or provide monthly support, or find some other way to rescue them from the consequences of their choices. But the woman I had become over the past 3 years was different. I had learned the value of my own worth not through their validation, but through my own achievements. I had built something meaningful without their support, surrounded myself with people who believed in my capabilities, and discovered that their approval was neither necessary nor sufficient for my success. "That's a difficult situation," I said. Finally. "I'm sure you'll figure out the best path forward." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything he wasn't saying and everything I wasn't offering. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Well, we were also wondering if you might be interested in some kind of family business opportunity. Maybe there's a way EcoWrap could benefit from additional investment, and we could benefit from the returns." Additional investment. The euphemism was almost insulting in its transparency. After refusing to invest when I needed support, after funding my brother's doomed venture while dismissing mine as too risky, they were now asking me to provide them with the returns they had failed to achieve through their own poor decision-making. "EcoWrap is actually fully funded for our current growth plans," I replied. "We're not seeking additional investors at this time." "Of course," Dad said quickly. "I just thought it might be worth exploring. Family supporting family, you know. Family supporting family." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implications and contradictions. Where had that philosophy been when I needed their support? When had family loyalty mattered during the months I'd spent temping and saving every penny to bootstrap my business? "I appreciate the thought," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral. "But I need to focus on our existing obligations right now." We spoke for a few more minutes about safe topics, holiday plans, the weather, Ryan's job search that had been ongoing since ConnectFlow's failure. But the real conversation had ended with my polite refusal to rescue them from their financial difficulties. After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, looking out at the Phoenix skyline and thinking about the strange turns life can take. 3 years ago, I had begged these same people to believe in my dream. Tonight, they had essentially begged me to save them from their nightmare. The email that had started this whole reflection was still open on my computer screen, with its desperate subject line and 4-word plea. Now I understood it wasn't just a request for help. It was an admission of failure, a recognition that the daughter they had deemed unworthy of investment had become their only hope for financial salvation. Tomorrow, I would need to decide how to respond. But tonight, I simply sat with the profound satisfaction of knowing that I had proven them wrong about everything that mattered. EcoWrap Solutions was thriving, my team was growing, and my future was bright, all without a single dollar of their support or a moment of their belief. Sometimes the sweetest victory is simply becoming the person others thought you could, Never be. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is allowing them to face the consequences of their choices without rushing to their rescue. The question Emma had posed months earlier echoed in my mind. What kind of person did I want to be when they came asking? I was about to find out. The phone call with Dad haunted me for days. I found myself replaying every word, every pause, every carefully constructed euphemism designed to preserve their dignity while appealing to my sympathy. Emma noticed my distraction during our weekly team meeting, where I missed 3 separate questions about our upcoming product launch. "Earth to Alex," she said with a gentle smile after I'd stared blankly at the quarterly projections for the 3rd time. "Want to talk about whatever's eating at you?" I glanced around the conference room at our small but dedicated team. Marcus, our newest hire, was busy updating inventory spreadsheets. Sarah, our marketing coordinator, was sketching logo concepts for our compostable container line. These people depended on EcoWrap for their livelihoods, and they deserved a leader whose attention wasn't fractured by family drama. "Family stuff," I said simply. "Nothing that affects the business." Emma raised an eyebrow but didn't push. She'd been my sounding board through every major decision since we'd started this journey together, and she knew when I was ready to talk, I would. That evening, she lingered after everyone else had gone home, settling into the chair across from my desk with the patient expression of someone prepared to wait as long as necessary. "They called, didn't they?" she said. "Your parents." I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the weight of carrying this alone. "Dad, last Thursday, very carefully didn't ask for help while making it clear they needed it. And I very carefully didn't offer any while making it clear I understood what they were really asking." Emma was quiet for a moment, studying my face. "How do you feel about that?" It was such a simple question, but it opened a floodgate of emotions I'd been trying to suppress. Relief that I'd held firm. Guilt for taking satisfaction in their desperation. Anger that they'd put me in this position at all. Sadness for the relationship we might have had if they'd chosen differently 3 years ago. Confused, I admitted. Part of me wants to help them because they're my parents, and seeing them struggle is painful. But another part of me thinks, they made their choice when they decided Ryan's pipe dream was worth funding and my business plan wasn't. "Those things can both be true," Emma said gently. "You can love them and still maintain boundaries. You can feel sorry for their situation and still refuse to enable their poor decision-making." "Is that what I'd be doing? Enabling them?" Emma leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "What message does it send if you rescue them from the consequences of favoring Ryan over you? What lesson do they learn if the daughter they refuse to support becomes their financial salvation?" I knew she was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things entirely. These were the people who had raised me, who had attended my school, plays, and cheered at my graduation. The fact that they'd failed me in one crucial moment didn't erase decades of shared history. "Maybe I'm being petty," I said. "Maybe I should be the bigger person." "Being the bigger person doesn't mean being a doormat," Emma replied firmly. "It means making choices based on your values rather than your emotions. What are your values? Telling you to do?" That question stayed with me through the weekend as I tried to focus on preparing for our biggest client presentation yet. A major retail chain was considering EcoWrap as their exclusive sustainable packaging provider, a contract that would triple our revenue and establish us as a serious player in the industry. The presentation was Monday morning, and it should have commanded my complete attention. Instead, I found myself thinking about Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, about the way Dad's face had lit up when Ryan first described Connect Flow, about the polite distance that had characterized my relationship with my parents since their investment decision. They'd never been cruel or abusive, just consistently blind to anything that didn't fit their predetermined narrative about their children's roles. Ryan was the creative one, the risk taker, the visionary who deserved support even when his visions were built on fantasy. I was the responsible one, the safe choice, the daughter who would find her own way because she always had. It was a dynamic that had shaped our entire childhood, and apparently nothing had changed in our adult years. The retail presentation went flawlessly. Emma and I tag-teamed the technical aspects, while Tom, our investor and board advisor, handled questions about scalability and market positioning. By the end of the hour, the procurement team was already discussing implementation timelines and volume commitments. "We'll have a decision by Friday," their lead buyer promised as we packed up our materials. "But I can tell you off the record that this is exactly what we've been looking for. Your products solve real problems while meeting our sustainability goals." Walking back to our office, I felt the familiar rush of professional accomplishment. We'd built something that mattered, something that solved real problems and created genuine value. The contrast with Ryan's failed social media app couldn't have been starker. ConnectFlow had been built on assumptions about what users might want, while EcoWrap addressed needs that were already urgent and growing. That afternoon, Tom stopped by to debrief the presentation and discuss our growth strategy. As our conversation wound down, he brought up something that had been on my mind for weeks. "You know, Alex, with the retail contract and our projected growth, EcoWrap is going to need additional capital in the next 18 months. Not for survival, but for expansion. Have you given any thought to our next funding round?" I had, extensively. Our success had attracted attention from larger investors, and we'd received preliminary inquiries from venture capital firms looking to invest in sustainable technology companies. The valuations being discussed were far beyond what I'd dreamed possible when I'd started this journey in my studio apartment. "I've been thinking about it," I admitted. "The question is whether we want to maintain control or bring in partners who might push us in directions we're not ready for." "That's always the trade-off," Tom agreed. "But there's another option we haven't discussed. What about bringing in individual investors? People who believe in the mission and can provide capital without demanding operational control." It was an intriguing possibility. Individual investors often had more patience than institutional ones, and they could provide valuable expertise along with funding. The challenge was finding the right partners who shared our values and long-term vision. "Any thoughts on who might be interested?" I asked. Tom smiled. "Actually, I've had several people ask about investment opportunities, including someone who might surprise you." He paused dramatically, clearly enjoying the suspense. "Jennifer Walsh, your parents' financial advisor. She's been following EcoWrap's progress and is very impressed with your growth trajectory." The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Jennifer had been managing my parents' investments for over a decade, including the disastrous ConnectFlow funding. Now she wanted to invest in the business they'd refused to support. "She knows about their decision not to invest in EcoWrap originally?" I asked. "She does. In fact, that's part of why she's interested. She sees it as an opportunity to make up for what she considers poor advice she gave them at the time." Poor advice. That was a charitable way of describing the decision to fund an untested social media startup over a researched sustainable packaging business. But Jennifer's interest raised intriguing possibilities. If our parents' own financial advisor wanted to invest in EcoWrap, it would send a clear message about which decision had been the right one. "I'd be open to a conversation," I said finally. "But I want to be careful about mixing business with personal relationships." "Understood. She's a professional, and she'd approach this as a business investment, not a personal favor." That evening, I called Jennifer directly to discuss the possibility. She was refreshingly straightforward about her motivations. "Alex, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of investment decisions," she said. "Your parents' choice to fund ConnectFlow over EcoWrap was one of the worst I've witnessed. Not because Ryan's a bad kid, but because the business fundamentals were never there. Did you advise them against it?" A pause. I expressed concerns about the market research and competitive landscape, but ultimately, they made the decision based on family loyalty rather than financial logic. Family loyalty. The same concept they'd claimed to value when asking for my help, but had somehow overlooked when I'd needed theirs. "Why do you want to invest in EcoWrap now?" I asked. "Because it's a solid business with excellent growth potential and competent leadership. The kind of investment I wish I'd steered your parents toward 3 years ago." Jennifer's voice softened. Slightly. "And because I think you deserve to have someone bet on your success who isn't betting against your brother's failure." The distinction was important. This wouldn't be about punishing Ryan or proving my parents wrong. It would be about recognizing EcoWrap's value on its own merits. "What kind of investment are you considering?" $50,000 for 5% equity, enough to give you some expansion capital without diluting your control significantly. It was a fair offer, and Jennifer's expertise in financial management could be valuable as we scaled. More importantly, her investment would represent validation from someone who understood both our business and our family dynamics. "I'll discuss it with Emma and Tom and get back to you," I promised. The next few days brought a flurry of activity, as we finalized the retail contract and began planning for the operational changes it would require. The deal was even better than we'd hoped, with guaranteed minimum orders and built-in incentives for exceeding sustainability targets. Emma was thrilled about Jennifer's investment proposal, seeing it as both financial opportunity and poetic justice. Tom was more cautious, wanting to ensure that personal relationships didn't complicate business decisions. But after reviewing Jennifer's credentials and investment history, he agreed she would be a valuable addition to our investor group. The contract signing was scheduled for the following Monday, which gave me the weekend to process the magnitude of what was happening. In the span of 3 years, I'd gone from begging my parents for $75,000 to managing investment offers and million-dollar contracts. The business they'd deemed too risky was becoming more successful than they'd probably imagined possible. That's when the second call came. This time it was Mom, and her approach was entirely different from Dad's careful diplomacy. She called Sunday evening while I was reviewing contract terms, her voice tight with stress and barely contained panic. "Alex, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me," she began without preamble. "Okay," I said cautiously. "Are you deliberately trying to hurt us? Because that's how it feels right now." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Jennifer Walsh called to tell us she's investing in your company. Our own financial advisor is putting money into the business we couldn't afford to support. Do you have any idea how that makes us feel?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, Jennifer's investment has nothing to do with you. She approached Tom about investing, and we agreed because she's a qualified investor who believes in our business. Don't be naive, Alex. This is about revenge, and you know it." Revenge. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. Was there truth to her accusation? Had I accepted Jennifer's investment partly because of the symbolic significance, the vindication it represented? "This is about business," I said finally. "EcoWrap needs capital to grow, and Jennifer is offering fair terms with valuable expertise. The fact that she also happens to be your financial advisor is coincidental." "Coincidental," Mom repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Nothing about this situation is coincidental, Alex. You're rubbing our noses in our mistake." "What mistake?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Not investing in your business when you asked us to." There, it was. The closest thing to an admission of error I was likely to get from either parent. But it came wrapped in accusations and self-pity rather than genuine apology or accountability. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had," I said, echoing the diplomatic language Dad had used about ConnectFlow's failure. "I don't hold that against you." Then why does it feel like you're punishing us? The question revealed so much about how they viewed the situation. In their minds, my success wasn't independent validation of my capabilities or proof that their concerns had been unfounded. It was a form of punishment, a deliberate attempt to make them feel bad about their choices. Mom, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm building a business and making decisions that are best for that business. If those decisions make you uncomfortable, that's something you need to work through. Easy for you to say. You're not the one facing retirement with half the savings you planned on. The conversation was spiraling into territory I wasn't prepared for. Mom's pain was real, and her financial stress was legitimate, but her response was to blame me for their situation rather than accepting responsibility for the choices that had created it. I'm sorry you're dealing with financial challenges, I said carefully, but I can't be responsible for fixing problems I didn't create. We're family, Mom said, her voice breaking slightly. Family helps family. That's what your father and I taught you. Is it? I asked quietly. Because when I needed help 3 years ago, the lesson I learned was that family helps family only when it's convenient and low risk. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken resentments and disappointed expectations. Finally, Mom spoke again, her voice smaller than before. We're proud of what you've accomplished, Alex. We always believed you'd be successful. You just didn't believe it enough to invest in that success when it mattered. Another pause. We made mistakes, but punishing us for those mistakes won't change anything. I'm not punishing you, I repeated. I'm protecting myself and my business from people who've proven they don't have faith in my judgment. The call ended shortly after that, with polite exchanges about holiday plans that fooled neither of us. I sat in my living room for a long time afterward, trying to process the emotional whiplash of defending my success to the people who should have been celebrating it. Emma was right that loving them and maintaining boundaries weren't mutually exclusive. But the conversation with Mom had revealed how difficult those boundaries would be to maintain when family loyalty was weaponized as manipulation. Monday morning brought the contract signing with our retail client, a milestone that should have been pure celebration. Instead, I found myself distracted by the ongoing family drama and the weight of decisions that seemed to matter far beyond their business implications. Tom noticed my distraction during the signing ceremony. Everything okay? He asked quietly while our lawyers reviewed final documents. Just some family complications, I replied. Nothing that affects the business. Famous last words? He said with a knowing smile. Family and business have a way of affecting each other whether we want them to or not. He was right, of course. The line between personal and professional was blurrier than I'd wanted to admit. Jennifer's investment wasn't just about capital and expertise. It was about validation and vindication. The retail contract wasn't just about revenue growth. It was about proving my parents wrong. But maybe that was okay. Maybe success motivated by the desire to prove doubters wrong was still success. Maybe building something meaningful out of disappointment and rejection was its own form of justice. The signing went smoothly, and we celebrated afterward with lunch at the same restaurant where Tom and I had first discussed his investment 3 years earlier. The full-circle nature of the moment wasn't lost on any of us. To EcoWrap Solutions, Tom said, raising his glass, and to proving that the best revenge is massive success. Is that what this is? I asked. Revenge? Maybe, Tom admitted. But if so, it's the constructive kind. You're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just succeeding despite them. There's a difference. Emma nodded in agreement. Your parents made a choice based on their priorities and biases. You made a different choice based on your capabilities and determination. The results speak for themselves. That afternoon, I finalized the investment agreement with Jennifer. The process was remarkably straightforward. professional in a way that highlighted how emotionally fraught the situation with my parents had become. "I want you to know," Jennifer said as we signed the documents, "this investment has nothing to do with my relationship with your parents. I'm investing because EcoWrap is a solid business with excellent growth potential." "I appreciate that," I replied, "but I also understand that the optics might be complicated." "The optics are only complicated if we make them complicated. This is a business transaction between qualified parties. Your parents' feelings about it are their responsibility to manage." It was a refreshingly clear perspective on a situation that had become muddied by family dynamics and emotional baggage. Jennifer was treating EcoWrap as what it was, a successful business worthy of investment. The fact that my parents had missed that opportunity was their loss, not my burden. The weeks that followed brought a new energy to EcoWrap as we prepared for the massive operational scaling required by our retail contract. We leased additional warehouse space, hired 6 new employees, and implemented systems that could handle 10 times our current volume. Emma thrived in her expanded role as Chief Operating Officer, her background in sustainable technology proving invaluable as we optimized our production processes. Marcus stepped up as production manager, his attention to detail ensuring that quality remained high even as quantity increased dramatically. The growth was everything I'd dreamed of during those late nights in my studio apartment, sketching business plans and imagining what success might look like. But it was also exhausting, in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every decision seemed to have cascading effects. Every hire changed our company culture. Every new process required careful implementation and monitoring. Tom's experience proved invaluable during this transition. He'd seen other companies navigate rapid scaling, and his guidance helped us avoid common pitfalls that could have derailed our growth. "The hardest part about success," he told me during one of our weekly check-ins, "is learning to manage it without losing what made you successful in the first place." It was advice I found myself thinking about frequently as media attention began to focus on EcoWrap's rapid growth. Local business publications ran features on sustainable packaging trends, national environmental magazines profiled our innovative products, and industry conferences invited me to speak about entrepreneurship and market disruption. The recognition was gratifying, but it also felt surreal. 3 years earlier, I'd been working temp jobs and living on ramen noodles. Now I was being quoted as an expert on sustainable business practices and market innovation. The attention wasn't lost on my family. Ryan, who had been notably absent from family gatherings since ConnectFlow's failure, suddenly began showing interest in my business activities. He started liking my professional social media posts and making comments that suggested he was following EcoWrap's progress closely. The shift in his behavior became obvious during Thanksgiving dinner, the first family gathering since Mom's accusatory phone call. He'd clearly prepared talking points about sustainable packaging and market trends, trying to demonstrate knowledge he'd obviously researched specifically for the occasion. "The circular economy is really where things are heading," he said during dessert, using terminology I'd heard him employ exactly once before. Companies like EcoWrap are positioned perfectly for that transition. It was a transparent attempt to associate himself with my success, but it also revealed how thoroughly the family dynamics had shifted. The brother whose business acumen had once been unquestioned was now trying to prove his relevance by discussing my industry. "It's definitely an exciting time," I replied diplomatically, unwilling to embarrass him but also unwilling to validate his sudden expertise. Mom and Dad watched these exchanges with expressions I couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps, mixed with something that might have been regret. They made several comments about EcoWrap's success, always careful to frame them as observations rather than celebrations, as if acknowledging my achievements too enthusiastically might somehow diminish Ryan's worth. The careful balance was exhausting for everyone involved. We were all pretending that the elephant in the room wasn't there, that 3 years of poor decisions and hurt feelings could be overcome through polite conversation and selective amnesia. After dinner, Dad asked if he could speak with me privately. We walked out to the backyard where I'd played as a child, the desert landscape now illuminated by carefully placed solar lights that hadn't been there during my youth. "I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished," he said, his voice careful and measured. "Thank you," I replied, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we realize we may have made some mistakes in how we handled your initial business proposal." May have made some mistakes. The diplomatic language was classic Dad, acknowledging error without fully accepting responsibility or committing to specific wrongdoing. "We were trying to protect you from what we saw as unnecessary risk," he continued. "But we see now that we may have underestimated your capabilities and the market opportunity." "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "The thing is, Alex, we're still your parents, and despite our mistakes, we love you and want what's best for you." There it was, the setup for whatever request or expectation was coming next. Dad had never been one for extended heart-to-heart conversations without specific objectives. "Of course," I said, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "We were wondering if there might be opportunities for us to be more involved in EcoWrap's success. Not as investors necessarily, but as advisors or consultants. We have decades of experience in business and education that might be valuable." The request was so absurd I almost laughed. They wanted to benefit from the success they'd refused to support, to claim advisory roles in a business they'd dismissed as too risky to fund. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also revealing about how completely they'd failed to understand the lessons of the past 3 years. "EcoWrap has a strong advisory structure already," I said diplomatically. "Tom brings venture capital experience, Jennifer provides financial expertise, and we have industry specialists for technical issues." "But we're family," Dad said, echoing Mom's earlier argument. "That brings a different kind of value." "Does it?" I asked quietly. "Because my experience has been that family relationships can complicate business decisions in ways that aren't always helpful." Dad was quiet for a moment, recognizing the implicit criticism. "We deserve that," he said finally. "But holding grudges isn't good for anyone, Alex. At some point, you have to decide whether you want to move forward or stay stuck in the past." It was a masterful reframing of the situation, turning my boundary setting into grudge holding and my professional success into emotional stagnation. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. "I'm not stuck in the past," I replied. "I'm building a future based on the lessons I've learned. One of those lessons is to work with people who believe in my capabilities and share my vision." "And you don't think we believe in your capabilities now?" "Now isn't when I needed you to believe in them?" The conversation ended there, with Dad nodding slowly and suggesting we head back inside. But I could see in his expression that nothing had really been resolved. They still saw my success as something they deserved to benefit from, my boundaries, as obstacles to overcome rather than legitimate responses to their past behavior. The holidays passed with continued tension beneath the surface politeness. New Year's Eve brought the traditional family gathering, but this time I found myself mentally preparing for each interaction, anticipating the subtle pressures and emotional manipulations that had become standard family communication. Ryan's behavior had become increasingly uncomfortable to watch. His attempts to associate himself with EcoWrap's success were growing more desperate and obvious, culminating in a New Year's Eve toast where he praised our family's entrepreneurial spirit and suggested that success runs in the Chen DNA. Our success, family success. As if he'd contributed anything beyond cautionary tales about the importance of market research and business planning. The final straw came during a conversation with my aunt and uncle, longtime family friends who had always been supportive of both Ryan and me. Ryan was explaining sustainable packaging trends with the authority of someone who'd never worked in the industry, using phrases he'd clearly memorized from articles about EcoWrap. Alex has really inspired all of us to think differently about environmental responsibility, he said, his arm draped casually around my shoulders in a gesture of familial solidarity that made my skin crawl. That's wonderful, my aunt replied. It must be so rewarding to have family support for your business vision. Family support. I looked around the room at the people who had refused to invest in that vision, who had funded its competitor instead, who were now trying to claim credit for success they'd actively discouraged. The hypocrisy was staggering, but what bothered me more was how easily everyone seemed willing to accept this revised narrative. That's when I realized that Emma had been wrong about one thing. My parents hadn't come begging for help. They'd done something much more insidious. They'd begun rewriting history to make themselves the heroes of my success story, rather than obstacles I'd overcome despite their lack of support. The real test was still coming, and when it arrived, I would need to decide once and for all what kind of person I wanted to be when family loyalty was used as a weapon against my own best interests. The turning point came in February, during what should have been a routine quarterly board meeting. Tom, Jennifer, and I were reviewing EcoWrap's spectacular fourth quarter results when my phone started buzzing incessantly. After the third call in 5 minutes, I apologized and glanced at the screen. Ryan's name appeared repeatedly, followed by a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Family emergency, I told the others, stepping out to take the call. Alex, thank God. Ryan's voice was breathless, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. You need to come to the hospital right now. It's Dad. My blood went cold. What happened? Heart attack. They're doing surgery now. Mom's falling apart and I don't know what to do. The drive to Phoenix General felt surreal, traffic lights blurring past as I navigated through afternoon rush hour on autopilot. Despite everything that had happened between us, the thought of losing Dad filled me with a terror I hadn't expected. Family dynamics aside, he was still my father, still the man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with high school math homework. I found Mom and Ryan in the cardiac surgery waiting room, both looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, her usually perfect hair disheveled. Ryan was pacing the small space like a caged animal, his nervous energy filling the sterile room. How is he? I asked, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Mom. They don't know yet, she whispered. The blockage was severe. Dr. Martinez said the next few hours are critical. We waited in tense silence, the only sounds the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional announcement over the hospital intercom. I watched Mom clutch Dad's reading glasses, turning them over and over in her hands like a talisman. Ryan had finally stopped pacing and sat slumped in a corner chair, staring blankly at the wall. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Nurses provided periodic updates, their professional smiles offering comfort but no real information. Mom barely spoke, lost in her own thoughts and fears. Ryan made several trips to the cafeteria but returned with untouched coffee cups that grew cold on the waiting room tables. As night fell, I found myself thinking about the last real conversation I'd had with Dad. That awkward exchange in their backyard where he'd asked to become involved in EcoWrap's success. The memory felt petty now, our business disagreements insignificant compared to the possibility of losing him forever. Dr. Martinez finally emerged at nearly midnight, still wearing surgical scrubs, but with an expression that immediately eased some of the tension in the room. The surgery went well, she announced. We were able to clear the blockage and restore normal blood flow. Mr. Chen is stable and should make a full recovery. Mom burst into tears of relief while Ryan sagged against the wall. I felt my own eyes fill as the accumulated stress of the day finally found release. He'll need to stay in the ICU for at least 48 hours for monitoring, Dr. Martinez continued. After that, we'll move him to a regular room for a few more days. Full recovery will take time, but the prognosis is excellent. We were allowed brief visits to the ICU, where Dad lay connected to an array of monitors and tubes. He looked pale and vulnerable, so different from the confident man who had dismissed my business plan 3 years earlier. Mom held his hand and whispered reassurances while Ryan and I stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "We should let him rest," I said finally, noting the late hour and Dad's obvious exhaustion. "You two go ahead," Mom said without looking up. "I'm staying." Ryan and I exchanged glances. "Mom, you need rest too," he said gently. "The nurses will take good care of him." "I'm not leaving," she replied firmly. "Not tonight." The drive home was the first time Ryan and I had been alone together in months. The silence between us was complicated, filled with years of competition and recent resentments, but also softened by shared concern for Dad's health. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Ryan said as we waited at a red light. "I know things have been weird between all of us lately." Weird. It was such an inadequate word for the complex dynamics that had shaped our family interactions. But this wasn't the time for analyzing relationship patterns or assigning blame. "He's our father," I said simply. "Of course I came." Ryan nodded, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "The doctors say he'll be okay, but this really scared me. I keep thinking about all the things I never said to him." I understood that feeling completely. Despite our recent tensions, there were decades of shared history that couldn't be erased by business disagreements or financial conflicts. Dad had been imperfect, sometimes unfair, often blinded by his own biases. But he'd also been present for school plays and soccer games, patient with homework struggles and teenage drama. "You'll have plenty of time to say whatever you need to say," I assured Ryan. Dr. Martinez was optimistic about his recovery. "I hope so," Ryan replied quietly. "I just feel like I've disappointed him so much lately. First Connect Flow fails, then I can't find steady work. I know he and Mom are stressed about money partly because of my mistakes." It was the first time Ryan had openly acknowledged the financial impact of his failed startup or accepted responsibility for the consequences. The admission surprised me, both for its honesty and its timing. Dad's heart attack wasn't caused by business stress, I said. "These things happen. You can't blame yourself for his health problems." "Maybe not directly," Ryan said, "but the stress certainly didn't help. I see how worried they both are about retirement, how they try to hide their financial problems. I know my failure made everything worse." There was genuine remorse in his voice, a recognition of consequences that had been absent during his earlier attempts to associate himself with EcoWrap's success. The crisis had apparently stripped away some of his defensive mechanisms, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't seen since we were children. The following days established a routine of hospital visits and family coordination. Dad's recovery progressed steadily, his color improving and his energy returning day by day. But the medical emergency had exposed other issues that couldn't be addressed with surgery. The financial stress that Ryan had mentioned became impossible to ignore as bills began arriving. Dad's health insurance was decent but not comprehensive, and the deductibles and copays for cardiac surgery were substantial. More importantly, his heart attack had occurred just weeks before his planned return to work, a part-time consulting position he'd accepted to supplement their retirement income. Mom tried to hide her anxiety, but I could see the worry lines deepening around her eyes as she calculated expenses and reviewed their savings statements. The Connect Flow investment had already depleted their emergency fund, and now they were facing medical bills at the worst possible time. "We'll manage," she insisted when I gently asked about their financial situation. "Insurance will cover most of it." But I'd learned enough about healthcare costs through EcoWrap's employee benefit research to know that most often left families with crushing debt. The pride that had prevented them from accepting help earlier now seemed less important than their actual needs. Emma visited Dad during his second day in the regular room, bringing a beautiful arrangement of desert flowers and a card signed by our entire team. Her presence was warmly received, and I watched Mom's face soften as Emma shared stories about EcoWrap's community initiatives and environmental impact. "Alex has built something really special," Emma told my parents. "The way she's approached business growth while maintaining environmental values is inspiring to all of us." It was the kind of genuine praise that carried more weight than family compliments, professional recognition from someone with no obligation to flatter or appease. I saw Dad's expression change as Emma described our recent expansion and the positive response from both customers and industry observers. "We're very proud of her," Dad said, his voice carrying more conviction than his previous diplomatic statements. After Emma left, Dad asked me to stay for a private conversation. The cardiac monitors beeped steadily in the background as he struggled to find the right words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days," he began slowly, "about priorities and mistakes and what really matters." I waited, unsure where this was leading but sensing the importance of the moment. "Your business success isn't something that happened despite us," he continued. "It's something that happened because of who you are, and who you are is someone we should have supported from the beginning." The admission was more direct than any previous acknowledgement of their mistakes, but it also felt incomplete, as if he was building towards something more significant. "I know we can't undo our decision not to invest in EcoWrap initially," Dad said, "but I want you to know that it wasn't about not believing in you. It was about our own fears and limitations." "I understand that now," I replied, "but understanding doesn't change the impact those decisions had." Dad nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise, but I am asking if there's any possibility of moving forward differently." There it was again, the request for involvement disguised as reconciliation. But this time it felt less manipulative and more desperate, driven by genuine recognition of what they'd lost, rather than opportunistic desire for what they might gain. "What are you asking specifically?" I said. "Nothing," Dad said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just hoping that someday you might see us as family again instead of people who failed you." The conversation was interrupted by a nurse checking his vital signs, but his words stayed with me through the rest of the visit and the drive back to my apartment. The distinction he'd drawn was important: family relationship versus business opportunity. But the two had become so intertwined that separating them seemed nearly impossible. The next morning brought a call from Jennifer Walsh, who had been monitoring the family situation with professional concern. "How is your father doing?" she asked immediately. "Much better. He should be released tomorrow if his recovery continues at this pace." "That's wonderful news," Jennifer said. "I wanted to discuss something with you, but I wasn't sure about the timing given the circumstances." "What's on your mind?" "Your parents' financial situation. I know this isn't easy to talk about, but the medical bills combined with their existing challenges are creating a serious problem." I'd suspected as much but hadn't wanted to pry into details. "How serious?" "Without significant help, they're looking at potential bankruptcy within 6 months. The house might be at risk." The stark assessment hit me like a physical blow. Bankruptcy, losing their home. These weren't abstract consequences, but real threats to their basic security. "Are there any other options?" I asked. "Limited ones. They could sell the house and downsize dramatically, but the market isn't favorable right now. They could take on additional debt, but their credit situation makes that difficult. Or they could receive help from family members." There it was. The decision I'd been avoiding for months finally crystallized into unavoidable reality. My parents needed help, not for comfort or convenience, but for basic survival. The question was whether I could provide that help without compromising my own principles or enabling their poor decision-making patterns. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked. The immediate crisis is the medical bills, which are due within 60 days. After that, their ongoing expenses exceed their income by about $2,000 per month. $2,000 per month wasn't an insignificant amount, but it was manageable for EcoWrap's current financial position. The question wasn't whether I could afford to help, but whether I should. "I need some time to think about this," I told Jennifer. "Of course. But Alex, whatever you decide, please remember that financial help doesn't have to mean enabling bad behavior. There are ways to structure assistance that protect both their needs and your boundaries." After hanging up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the Phoenix skyline and thinking about the circular nature of family relationships. 3 years ago, I'd needed their help to start EcoWrap. They'd refused, leading to years of hurt feelings and damaged trust. Now they needed my help to avoid financial ruin, and I had to decide whether their earlier refusal should influence my response. Emma found me there an hour later, still staring out the window without really seeing anything. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I explained Jennifer's call and the stark financial reality my parents were facing. Emma listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just providing supportive presence. "What does your gut tell you to do?" she asked when I'd finished. "Help them," I admitted. "Not because they deserve it or because it's fair, but because they're my parents and I love them despite everything." "And what's stopping you?" "The fear that helping them validates their earlier treatment of me. That it teaches them they can make terrible decisions and expect me to fix the consequences." Emma was quiet for a moment, considering my words carefully. "What if you could help them in a way that doesn't validate their behavior? What if there were conditions that protected your interests while meeting their needs?" It was an intriguing possibility. "What kind of conditions?" "That's up to you." But Jennifer mentioned structuring assistance to maintain boundaries. Maybe that's worth exploring. That evening, I called Tom to discuss the situation and get his perspective as both investor and mentor. His response was pragmatic and unsentimental. "This is a business decision disguised as a family decision," he said bluntly. "Your parents' financial crisis isn't your responsibility, but your response to it will define your character and your family relationships going forward." Meaning? Meaning there's no objectively right answer. You can help them and risk being taken advantage of, or you can refuse and risk permanent damage to your relationships. Either choice has consequences you'll have to live with. "That's not exactly comforting advice," I said. Tom chuckled. "I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to help you think clearly about a complicated situation." "So what would you do?" "I'd help them, but with very clear boundaries and expectations. Financial assistance doesn't have to be unconditional charity. It can be structured as a business arrangement that protects everyone's interests." "What does that look like practically?" "You could offer to pay their medical bills directly rather than giving them cash. You could provide a monthly stipend with clear terms about what it covers and what happens if they make poor financial decisions in the future. You could even structure it as a loan with reasonable terms rather than a gift." The suggestions made sense, offering ways to provide help without abandoning the lessons I'd learned about setting boundaries with family members. "There's another consideration," Tom continued. "Your parents' financial crisis is partly the result of their investment in Ryan's failed business. Helping them recover from that crisis indirectly benefits him as well." I hadn't considered that angle, but it was true. If my parents lost their house, Ryan would lose his current living situation and support system. My assistance would stabilize his situation along with theirs. "Does that change your recommendation?" I asked. "Not necessarily, but it's something to factor into your decision-making. You're not just helping your parents. You're potentially enabling your brother's continued dependence on them After talking with Tom, I spent the weekend researching family financial assistance strategies and consulting with an attorney about loan structures and legal protections. By Monday morning, I had a plan that felt both generous and responsible. The conversation with my parents took place in their living room the day after Dad was released from the hospital. He was still weak but alert, sitting in his favorite recliner with a blanket across his legs. Mom hovered nearby, fussing with medications and making sure he was comfortable. "I want to discuss your financial situation," I began without preamble. Mom's face tightened with embarrassment. "Alex, we don't want you to worry about that. We'll manage somehow." "I know you will," I said gently. "But I'd like to help if you're willing to accept it." The relief that crossed both their faces was immediate and profound. But I held up a hand before they could respond. "I have some conditions," I continued. "This isn't charity, and it's not validation of past decisions. It's assistance offered because I love you and want you to be secure, but structured to protect everyone involved." Dad leaned forward slightly. "What kind of conditions?" "First, I'll pay your medical bills directly rather than giving you cash. Second, I'll provide a monthly stipend to cover the gap between your income and expenses, but it comes with a detailed budget that we all agree to. Third, any future major financial decisions need to be discussed with Jennifer before they're made." "That seems reasonable," Mom said quickly. "Fourth," I continued, "this assistance is contingent on family counseling. We need to address the communication patterns that led to this situation." The suggestion clearly made them uncomfortable, but Dad nodded slowly. "If that's what it takes. Finally, this is a loan, not a gift. We'll structure reasonable repayment terms that don't create hardship, but there needs to be accountability." The terms were fair but firm, offering help while maintaining the boundaries that had become essential to my emotional health. More importantly, they required acknowledgement that past decisions had consequences and future ones needed better judgment. "We accept," Dad said without hesitation. "And Alex, we can't thank you enough." "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "Thank me when we've all learned to be family to each other in healthier ways." The next few weeks involved detailed financial planning, legal documentation, and the beginning of family counseling sessions. The process was sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately productive, creating space for honest conversations about expectations, disappointments, and hopes for the future. Ryan's reaction to the arrangement was complicated. He was grateful that his parents' security was protected, but also clearly uncomfortable with the conditions and accountability measures. His dependence on their support meant he was indirectly affected by every aspect of the plan. "This feels like you're taking control of the whole family," he complained during one particularly tense counseling session. "I'm taking responsibility for my own boundaries," I corrected. "There's a difference." The counselor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, helped us navigate these conversations with professional objectivity. She validated the hurt feelings on all sides while helping us develop better communication strategies going forward. Financial help between family members is often complicated by unresolved emotional issues, she explained during one session. The goal is to separate the practical assistance from the psychological dynamics. It was exactly what I'd been trying to achieve, helping my parents without rewarding their past behavior or compromising my own growth. The arrangement worked better than I'd expected. Dad's health continued to improve. The medical bills were resolved without bankruptcy, and their monthly expenses were covered through my stipend. More importantly, the structure of the assistance seemed to restore some dignity to their situation by making it a business arrangement rather than charity. But the real test came 4 months later, when Ryan approached me with his next big idea. "I've been thinking about starting a consulting business," he announced during a family dinner, "helping small businesses with their social media strategies." The proposal was so tone-deaf I almost laughed. Ryan wanted to become a consultant in the same field where his own startup had failed spectacularly, advising other businesses on strategies he'd never successfully implemented. "That's an interesting idea," I said diplomatically. "What's your experience base for that kind of consulting?" "Well, I learned a lot from ConnectFlow's challenges," Ryan replied, apparently unaware of how that sounded. "I know what doesn't work, which is valuable knowledge." "Knowledge of what doesn't work isn't the same as knowledge of what does work," I pointed out gently. "I could learn as I go," Ryan insisted. "The important thing is getting started, and I was hoping maybe you could provide some seed funding to get things off the ground." There it was. Despite everything that had happened, despite the financial crisis his last venture had created for our parents, Ryan was asking me to fund his next unresearched business idea. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also revealing. Ryan had learned nothing from ConnectFlow's failure or our parents' financial struggles. He still saw entrepreneurship as a game where enthusiasm mattered more than preparation, where family obligation should override business judgment. "Ryan," I said carefully, "I think you should focus on gaining experience in social media marketing before trying to consult with other businesses about it." "But that could take years," he protested. "By then, the opportunity might be gone." "What opportunity specifically?" Ryan's explanation was vague and contradictory, full of buzzwords but lacking any substantive analysis of market needs or competitive advantages. It was ConnectFlow all over again, packaged in different language but built on the same foundation of wishful thinking and inadequate preparation. Mom and Dad watched this exchange with obvious discomfort, caught between their natural inclination to support Ryan's ambitions and their growing awareness of his track record. The family counseling sessions had helped them recognize some of the patterns that had led to poor decision-making, but old habits died hard. "Maybe you could start small," Mom suggested diplomatically. "Offer services to just a few clients while you're learning." "How can I do that without startup capital?" Ryan asked, frustrated by the lack of immediate enthusiasm for his plan. "The same way most consultants start," I replied, "by using your existing skills and resources to serve clients first, then reinvesting the profits into growth." It was advice I'd given dozens of times to other entrepreneurs, the standard wisdom about bootstrapping and organic growth. But Ryan's face showed he found this approach completely unacceptable. "That's not how real businesses work," he said, dismissively. "Real businesses start with investment and scale quickly." ConnectFlow started with investment and scaled quickly, I pointed out. "How did that work out?" The comment was harsher than I'd intended, but Ryan's continued refusal to learn from his mistakes was frustrating. He was asking me to make the same error our parents had made, funding his dreams without requiring him to prove their viability first. "That's different," Ryan said defensively. "I've learned from those mistakes." "Have you?" "Because this proposal has all the same problems as ConnectFlow. No market research, no competitive analysis, no clear value proposition, no realistic financial projections." "I don't need to prove myself to you," Ryan snapped. "You're my sister, not some venture capitalist." "Actually, that's exactly what I am when you're asking for business investment. Family relationships don't change fundamental business principles." The conversation devolved from there, with Ryan accusing me of being unsupportive and me trying to explain why emotional support and financial investment were different things. Our parents sat uncomfortably through the argument, clearly hoping to avoid taking sides, but also recognizing the validity of my concerns. The evening ended with Ryan storming out, frustrated by my refusal to fund his consulting venture. But the incident had served an important purpose, clarifying the boundaries I'd established and testing everyone's commitment to healthier family dynamics. Dad brought up the situation during our next counseling session, expressing concern about the tension between Ryan and me. "I understand Alex's position," he said carefully, "but I also worry about Ryan feeling excluded from the family's success." "Ryan isn't excluded from anything," I replied. he's excluded from making poor financial decisions with other people's money? There's a difference. Dr. Mitchell helped us explore the distinction between supporting family members emotionally and enabling their destructive behaviors financially. The conversation was difficult but necessary, establishing principles that would guide future interactions. It's possible to love someone and still refuse to participate in their self-destructive patterns, she explained. In fact, it's often the most loving thing you can do. The session ended with a commitment from all of us to separate emotional support from financial enablement, a distinction that would prove crucial in the months ahead as EcoWrap continued to grow and Ryan continued to struggle with finding his professional direction. But the real turning point in our family dynamics was still to come, triggered by an event none of us could have anticipated and forcing decisions that would define our relationships for years to come. The email that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, nearly 2 years after Dad's heart attack and 18 months into the structured financial assistance arrangement I'd established with my parents. I was reviewing third-quarter projections when my assistant knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before. "Alex, you need to see this immediately," Sarah said, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "It's from Peterson Industries." Peterson Industries. The name sent a jolt of electricity through my chest. They were one of the largest packaging conglomerates in North America, the kind of company that had seemed impossibly out of reach when EcoWrap was just an idea sketched on coffee shop napkins. Their annual revenue exceeded most small countries' GDP, and their client list read like a who's who of Fortune 500 companies. I opened the email with trembling fingers, scanning the formal language twice before the words fully registered. Peterson Industries was interested in acquiring EcoWrap Solutions, not partnering with us, not licensing our technology, but purchasing the entire company outright. We believe EcoWrap's innovative approach to sustainable packaging aligns perfectly with Peterson's strategic vision for environmental leadership, the message read. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss acquisition terms that reflect both your company's current value and its tremendous growth potential. The numbers mentioned in preliminary discussions were staggering. 8 figures. More money than I'd ever imagined possible, enough to secure not just my own future, but generations of financial freedom. The kind of life-changing wealth that most entrepreneurs only dream about. I sat staring at the screen for 10 minutes, my mind racing through implications and possibilities. This was validation on a scale I'd never anticipated. Recognition from industry giants who had noticed what my own family had dismissed as too risky to support. Emma's reaction when I called her into my office was immediate and intense. "Holy shit," she breathed, reading over my shoulder. "Alex, do you realize what this means?" "I'm trying to process it," I admitted. "Peterson Industries wants to buy us. They want to buy something that started because my parents wouldn't invest $75,000. The irony is pretty incredible," Emma agreed. "But more importantly, what do you want to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? Financial security beyond my wildest dreams, certainly. Recognition of EcoWrap's value from the biggest players in the industry, absolutely. But there were other considerations too, factors that complicated what should have been a straightforward business decision. "I need to talk to Tom," I said finally, "and probably get legal advice about what this kind of acquisition would look like." Tom's response was characteristically measured and strategic. We met for lunch at the same restaurant where we'd celebrated our retail contract signing, the full-circle nature of the moment not lost on either of us. "Peterson Industries doesn't make frivolous acquisition offers," he said, cutting into his salmon with deliberate precision. "If they're approaching you, it's because they see significant value in what you've built." "What do you think EcoWrap is actually worth?" I asked. "Conservatively? Given your growth trajectory, client base, and market position, I'd estimate somewhere between 12 and 15 million. But if Peterson sees strategic value beyond pure financials, they might be willing to pay a premium. $12 to $15 million. The numbers seemed surreal, especially when I remembered sitting in my parents' dining room 3 years earlier, explaining why $75,000 was a reasonable investment in my future. There's something else to consider, Tom continued. Peterson's interest validates everything you've built, but it also means other companies will likely start paying attention. This might not be your only offer. You think I should wait? I think you should explore all your options before making any decisions. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it's also irreversible. Once you sell EcoWrap, you lose control over its future direction. That afternoon, I called the attorney who had helped structure the loan agreement with my parents. Jennifer had recommended him as someone experienced with business acquisitions and mergers, and I needed professional guidance to navigate the complex legal and financial aspects of Peterson's offer. The preliminary terms look favorable, he explained during our meeting. But we'll need to negotiate details about employee retention, operational integration, and your own role in the transition. What about my existing investors? I asked, thinking of Tom and Jennifer's equity stakes. They'll need to approve any sale, obviously, but given the potential returns, I doubt you'll face much opposition. Indeed, when I called Tom and Jennifer separately to discuss the acquisition offer, both were supportive but urged careful consideration of all aspects beyond pure financial gain. This is your decision to make, Jennifer said during our phone conversation. But remember that money is just one factor. You've built something meaningful with EcoWrap, something that reflects your values and vision. Make sure you're comfortable with how Peterson might change that. It was advice I found myself returning to repeatedly over the following days as I researched Peterson Industries' corporate culture and business practices. They were undeniably successful, with decades of market leadership and impressive financial performance. But they were also a traditional company with conventional approaches to manufacturing and distribution, very different from EcoWrap's innovative and environmentally focused methods. The formal meeting with Peterson's acquisition team was scheduled for the following week at their corporate headquarters in Denver. I flew out on a crisp October morning, carrying a briefcase full of financial documents and a head full of conflicted thoughts about EcoWrap's future. Peterson's offices were everything I'd expected from a major corporation. Gleaming glass towers, marble lobbies, conference rooms the size of most people's apartments. The acquisition team consisted of 3 executives who introduced themselves, with impressive titles and firm handshakes. Ms. Chen, said Patricia Williams, Peterson's Director of Strategic Acquisitions, we're excited to discuss how EcoWrap might fit into Peterson's expanding portfolio of sustainable solutions. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in corporate due diligence. They'd researched every aspect of EcoWrap's operations, from our supplier relationships to our employee retention rates. Their questions were probing but respectful, clearly, designed to assess not just our current value, but our potential for integration into their existing structure. Your growth metrics are exceptional, noted David Chen. No relation, despite the shared surname, Peterson's Vice President of Innovation. But we're particularly impressed by your market positioning and brand recognition within the sustainable packaging sector. Thank you, I replied. We've worked hard to build trust with both customers and suppliers. That trust is exactly what Peterson values, Patricia continued. We believe EcoWrap's reputation for innovation and environmental responsibility would strengthen our entire sustainable product line. The financial terms they outlined were even more generous than I'd hoped. $18 million for complete acquisition, with additional performance bonuses if certain integration milestones were met. The number was so large it felt abstract, like monopoly money rather than real compensation. We'd also want to discuss your role in the transition, David added. Peterson values continuity and leadership, especially for companies with strong founder involvement. What would that look like practically? I asked. We'd offer you a 2-year contract as Division Director of Sustainable Solutions, overseeing not just EcoWrap's integration, but expansion of our entire environmental product line. The compensation package would be competitive with similar executive positions. It was an attractive offer, providing both immediate wealth and ongoing career opportunities. But something about the corporate environment felt foreign after years of EcoWrap's collaborative, mission-driven culture. "I'll need some time to consider everything we've discussed," I said finally. "Of course," Patricia replied. "This is a significant decision. Take whatever time you need, but we'd appreciate an answer within 30 days. The flight back to Phoenix gave me 3 hours to process the meeting and its implications. $18 million would change everything about my life and my family's lives. It would eliminate any remaining financial stress for my parents, provide security for Emma and our other employees, and give me freedom to pursue whatever came next without economic pressure. But it would also mean giving up control of something I'd built from nothing, watching EcoWrap become just another division in Peterson's corporate hierarchy. The company that had started as a passion project addressing environmental problems would become a profit center focused primarily on shareholder returns. Emma was waiting at the airport when I landed, eager to hear about the meeting and Peterson's formal offer. $18 million, I told her as we drove back to the office, plus performance bonuses and a 2-year executive contract. Jesus Christ, Emma whispered. Alex, that's life-changing money. I know, but I keep thinking about what happens to EcoWrap after Peterson takes over. Will they maintain our environmental standards? Will they keep our supplier relationships? Will they care about the community initiatives we've started? Those are important questions, Emma agreed, but you can't control what happens after you sell. The question is whether you want to sell, not whether Peterson will be perfect stewards. That evening, I found myself driving to my parents' house without consciously deciding to go there. The financial assistance arrangement had stabilized their situation considerably, and Dad's health had improved to the point where he was considering part-time work again. The crisis that had brought us back together had evolved into a more sustainable family dynamic. I found them in their backyard, enjoying the cooler October weather and working on a crossword puzzle together. The scene was peaceful and domestic, a far cry from the financial stress and health scares of the previous year. Alex, honey, Mom said, looking up with genuine pleasure. What a nice surprise. How was your trip to Denver? I'd mentioned the Peterson meeting in general terms, not wanting to create unrealistic expectations before anything was finalized. But sitting in their garden, surrounded by the desert landscape of my childhood, I found myself wanting to share the magnitude of what was happening. Peterson Industries offered to buy EcoWrap, I said simply. The crossword puzzle was immediately forgotten as both parents focused their complete attention on me. Buy the whole company? Dad asked, his voice carefully neutral. Everything, for $18 million. The silence that followed was profound. Mom's hand went to her throat in an unconscious gesture of surprise, while Dad simply stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. 18 million, Mom repeated slowly as if testing the words. Alex, that's incredible. It's a lot of money, I agreed. But it also means giving up control of something I've spent 4 years building. What are you going to do? Dad asked. I don't know yet. I have 30 days to decide. We talked for another hour about the offer and its implications. My parents were supportive but careful not to push me in any particular direction, having learned through counseling to separate their own interests from my business decisions. As I was preparing to leave, Dad walked me to my car with the slow, deliberate pace that had become normal since his heart attack. Alex, he said quietly, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. Not just the financial success, but the way you've built something meaningful. Thank you, I replied. That means a lot. I also want to apologize again for not supporting your business initially. I know we've talked about this in counseling, but I need you to know that refusing to invest in EcoWrap was one of the biggest mistakes of my life. The admission was more direct than any previous apology, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. I've forgiven you for that, I said honestly. We all make decisions based on the information and perspective we have at the time. Maybe, Dad replied. But some decisions reveal more about our character than we'd like to admit. I chose to support Ryan's untested idea over your researched business plan because of my own biases and assumptions. That wasn't about risk assessment. It was about not seeing you clearly. The conversation was interrupted by Mom calling from the house, but Dad's words stayed with me during the drive home. His acknowledgement of the deeper issues behind their investment decision felt like genuine growth rather than mere damage control. The following week brought a development I hadn't anticipated. Ryan called to ask if we could meet for coffee, his first direct contact with me since the consulting business argument several months earlier. We met at Desert Grounds, the same coffee shop where Emma and I had first discussed EcoWrap's potential. Ryan looked better than he had in months, his appearance more professional and his demeanor less defensive than I remembered. I heard about the Peterson offer, he said after we'd ordered drinks. Congratulations. That's amazing validation of everything you've built. Thank you, I replied cautiously, unsure where the conversation was heading. I wanted to talk to you about something, Ryan continued, and I wanted to do it before you make any decisions about selling. He paused, clearly gathering his thoughts for something important. I owe you an apology, he said finally. Not just for the consulting business thing, but for everything. The way I've behaved since EcoWrap started succeeding. The way I've tried to take credit for your accomplishments. The way I've resented your success instead of celebrating it. The admission was unexpected and obviously difficult for him. I could see the struggle in his expression as he forced himself to acknowledge behaviors he'd previously defended or ignored. I've been jealous, he continued. Not just of your money or your recognition, but of your clarity about what you wanted to do and your ability to make it happen. I felt lost since Connect Flow failed, and instead of dealing with that constructively, I've taken it out on you. I appreciate you saying that, I replied carefully. There's more, Ryan said. I've been in therapy for the past few months, trying to figure out why I keep making the same mistakes over and over. One of the things I've realized is that I've never taken real responsibility for Connect Flow's failure or the impact it had on Mom and Dad's finances. This was new territory for Ryan, who had previously blamed Connect Flow's failure on market conditions and timing rather than his own lack of preparation. The truth is, I knew that business wasn't ready to launch when I took Mom and Dad's money, he admitted. I told myself I'd figure things out as I went, but deep down, I knew I was risking their security for something that probably wouldn't work. Why did you do it anyway? I asked. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it held answers to questions he'd been avoiding. Because it was easier than admitting I didn't know what I was doing, he said finally. Because Mom and Dad believed in me, and I didn't want to disappoint them by saying I wasn't ready. Because I thought maybe if I acted confident enough, everything would work out. The honesty was striking, so different from his previous deflections and excuses. Whatever work he'd been doing in therapy was clearly having an impact. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me, Ryan continued. I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand the difference between what I did and what you did. You prepared, you researched, you built something sustainable. I gambled with other people's money and lost. What are you going to do now? I asked. I got a job, Ryan said, and for the first time since we'd sat down, he smiled. Marketing. Coordinator at a nonprofit that helps small businesses develop sustainable practices. It's not glamorous, and it doesn't pay much, but it's real work that helps people. The change in his attitude was remarkable. The desperate ambition and defensive posturing had been replaced by something that looked like genuine maturity. "I'm happy for you," I said, and meant it. "Thanks. And Alex, whatever you decide about Peterson, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not as someone trying to benefit from your success, but as your brother who finally recognizes what you've accomplished." We talked for another hour about his job, his therapy, and his slowly improving relationship with our parents. The conversation felt different from any we'd had in years. Honest in a way that hadn't been possible when he was defensive and I was guarded. As we were leaving, Ryan brought up something that had been bothering him. "Can I ask you something about the Peterson offer?" he said. "Sure. Are you tempted to sell partly because it would prove something to Mom and Dad? Like the ultimate validation of their mistake?" The question was perceptive and uncomfortable. I'd been so focused on the financial and strategic aspects of the acquisition that I hadn't fully examined my own motivations. "Maybe," I admitted. "There would definitely be satisfaction in showing them what they missed out on." "I get that," Ryan said. "But don't let our family's dysfunction drive a decision this important. You've already proven everything you need to prove. Make this choice based on what you actually want for your future." It was surprisingly wise advice from someone who had spent years making decisions based on family expectations and personal insecurities. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad, trying to map out the pros and cons of accepting Peterson's offer. The financial benefits were obvious and overwhelming. $18 million would provide security and freedom beyond anything I'd imagined possible. But the non-financial considerations were more complex. Selling EcoWrap would mean trusting Peterson to maintain the environmental standards and ethical practices that had been central to our mission. It would mean walking away from the team I'd built and the culture we'd created together. It would mean giving up control over something that had become more than just a business to me. On the other hand, keeping EcoWrap meant continued responsibility for growth and competition, ongoing stress about market changes and business challenges. It meant remaining tied to Phoenix and the packaging industry when sale proceeds could fund any number of other ventures or life choices. I was still weighing these factors when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer Walsh's name, and I answered expecting routine business discussion. "Alex, I have some news that might affect your decision about the Peterson offer," she said without preamble. "What kind of news?" "I've been contacted by 3 other companies interested in acquiring EcoWrap. Apparently, word about Peterson's offer has leaked, and there's competitive interest." The information was both exciting and overwhelming. Multiple acquisition offers meant I had leverage in negotiations, but it also meant more complexity in an already difficult decision. "What kind of companies?" I asked. 2 are direct competitors to Peterson, major packaging corporations looking to strengthen their sustainable product lines. The third is more interesting. It's a private equity firm that specializes in environmental technology companies. "What's different about the private equity option?" "They're proposing a partial acquisition structure. They'd buy a controlling stake but leave you with significant ownership and complete operational control. It's a hybrid approach that might give you the best of both worlds." The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it was intriguing. Partial sale could provide substantial financial reward while preserving my ability to guide EcoWrap's future direction. "Are you available to meet tomorrow?" Jennifer asked. "I think we should discuss all your options before Peterson's deadline." The next morning brought a marathon strategy session in Jennifer's office, with Tom joining by phone and Emma participating remotely from EcoWrap's conference room. We spent 4 hours analyzing the different offers and their implications for both my personal future and the company's mission. "The financial terms are all substantial," Jennifer summarized. "Peterson's $18 million is the highest pure acquisition price, but the private equity firm's partial sale could ultimately be more valuable if EcoWrap continues growing." "What about the strategic fit?" Emma asked from the speakerphone. "That's where it gets complicated," Tom replied. Peterson has the resources and market position to scale EcoWrap nationally, but they're also the most likely to change operational practices. The private equity firm promises operational independence, but they'll expect significant growth and eventual exit strategies. I see. And the other packaging companies? I asked. Somewhere in between, Jennifer said. Better cultural fit than Peterson, but less financial upside than private equity. By the end of the meeting, I was more confused than when we'd started. Each option had compelling advantages and significant drawbacks. The decision that had seemed straightforward when Peterson first approached us now felt impossibly complex. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done since EcoWrap's early days. I drove out to the desert, found a quiet spot overlooking the valley, and just sat with my thoughts for several hours. The Phoenix skyline stretched below me, the city where I'd built something meaningful from nothing but determination and refused investment from people who should have believed in me. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Companies were now competing to buy what my own family had deemed too risky to support. The business plan that had been dismissed as unrealistic was now valued at nearly $20 million by multiple acquirers. But Ryan's question kept echoing in my mind. Was I considering sale partly as vindication, as the ultimate proof of my parents' mistake? And if so, did that matter as long as the financial terms were favorable? As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I found myself thinking about what had really motivated me to start EcoWrap in the first place. It hadn't been about proving anyone wrong or achieving financial success. It had been about solving a problem I cared about, creating products that made a positive environmental impact. That core mission hadn't changed, even if the business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. The question was whether selling to any of these companies would advance that mission or compromise it. I made my decision that evening, sitting in my car as the desert cooled around me and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. It wasn't the choice that would generate the most money or provide the most dramatic vindication of my parents' mistake. But it was the choice that felt truest to the values that had started this journey. The next morning, I called Jennifer to schedule meetings with all the potential acquirers. But this time, I wasn't going to listen to their offers with purely financial considerations in mind. I was going to evaluate each option based on their commitment to EcoWrap's environmental mission and their willingness to maintain the culture and practices that had made the company successful. The decision process that followed would test everything. I'd learned about business, family, and staying true to my own values even when the stakes were higher than I'd ever imagined. But for the first time since Peterson's initial offer, I felt confident about the criteria I'd use to make the choice. Whatever happened next, it would be based on my vision for EcoWrap's future, not on proving anything to anyone about the past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.